So I want to welcome everyone to our COVID-19 policy briefing on Black businesses, access to capital, and future stimulus proposals. My name is Spencer Overton. I'm the president of the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies, which is America's Black think tank. This session is part of a series of briefings that the Joint Center is doing on COVID policy and Black communities. We also do a weekly update on COVID-19 policy in Black communities that comes out every Monday. Please go to the Joint Center's website, it's jointcenter.org. All that work is available there. I want to thank some key people. First, I want to thank the entire Joint Center staff and board for their efforts to make this happen. In particular, Victoria Johnson, Dr. LaShonda Brinson, Aaliyah Jones, board chair Barbara Johnson, and board members Chanel Hardy, Tony Williams, and Paul Thornell, who all contributed in their unique ways to this event. I'd also like to thank the Joint Center's vice president, Jessica Fulton. She's an economist, and she's going to moderate today's event, and she's just brought so much to the Joint Center. Also want to thank Lisa Mensah of the Opportunity Finance Network. Our initial conversations on this topic actually led to this webinar. Also, thanks to the other speakers, we've partnered with Ron Busby and the U.S. Chambers, U.S. Black Chambers in the past on a survey of Black businesses, their membership. The Association for Enterprise Opportunities, a tapestry of Black business ownership in America. It's a great report, and it's shaped our past work as the Joint Center on Black businesses and the use of technology. And Connie Evans and her team, they regularly give us feedback on reports, and they help us improve our research. So we really appreciate that. I've been friends with former SBA Deputy Administrator Marie Johns, her husband, and her son for several years, and it's exciting to hear from her today and to be able to work together formally. And at this juncture, I'd like to introduce Alfred Liggins III, who will talk about the importance of Black businesses to our country and to the Black economy. Alfred is chairman of TV One, and he's been the CEO and president of Radio One since January 1997. Radio One owns and or operates 67 radio stations located in 22 urban markets in the United States and reaches approximately 13 million listeners every week. He holds an MBA from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. And on a personal note, Urban One has been a primary sponsor of the artwork of one of my cousins, artist Lane, and her Sojourner Truth bust and some other work. And I'm really thankful to Alfred and TV One for joining us today. Alfred?
Well, Spencer, thank you for that. I didn't know that the artist was your cousin. Portrait of my mother and myself hangs in the lobby here at Urban One. Thank you for the invitation. I see a lot of friends here, and that's probably the first time I've been introduced and nobody's mentioned my mother by who's Kathy Hughes. So I appreciate you guys letting me graduate, but you can't talk about Urban One and not mention our founder Kathy Hughes. But our company, some of you probably know, considers itself in the Black people business. We built a multi-pronged media company focused on the African-American audience, whether it's in radio stations we own, syndicated radio, other people's stations that take our programming, our cable network, TV One, our digital websites like News One or Bossip or Hello Beautiful. We follow our audience, wherever they are. But the premise of the company has always been about educating, entertaining, uplifting, and advocating for the African American community, as designed and thought out by my mother, and it's been my job and pleasure and an honor to execute that for 35 of those, 40 years. And so we've got a bird's eye view as to, what's going on. Because not only, are we a local company with stations all across the country in major metropolitan areas that are the hardest hit, the businesses that are our customers, are those that are suffering the most right now. We collectively reach about 80%, of the African American population across the country, and we act as a mouthpiece for, on a national level, whether it's, Mark Morial and the National Urban League, or Reverend Al Sharpton, National Action Network, NAACP. We also do that for individual organizations and businesses as well. So we feel like we serve a vital purpose, and help people with their agendas, and also growing their businesses. And you should, really be focused on the plight of African American business now, because we are at the forefront of the negativity caused by the pandemic. Not only did African Americans start out behind the eight ball, but we're the most likely to have jobs that are under $50,000 a year, and those are the most laid off or furloughed positions. We're most likely to own businesses that are in highly dense hotspots and therefore closed down. Right now, I'm sitting in my office in Silver Spring, Maryland, which is Washington, D.C., and up the road in Philadelphia, we have stations, and that's a hot spot. Here's a hot spot: Richmond, Virginia, Atlanta, Georgia, Houston, Dallas, and these businesses are shut. And so it's one thing to be prepared for a recession. It's another thing to be prepared for a complete cessation of economic activity. Distance learning. My son is supposedly doing online learning. He's in a Fairfax County public school system. Yeah, everybody in the IT department got fired there because they weren't able to get their act together. But in Philadelphia, 40% of students in Philadelphia actually don't have access to broadband in order to distance learn. Those are our communities. So not only are we the most laid off with the lowest economics, our children, are also going to be the least educated, through this period of time. There have been, numerous stories about frontline workers getting sick from COVID. Well, those frontline workers, whether they're healthcare workers working in hospitals or food supply chain workers working at a grocery store or in a meat processing plant, are more likely to be minority, and in many cases African American, and that's going to be an even further degradation of economic opportunity in our community. I think that all of the stimulus that has taken place that people were hopeful of, at least the first round, didn't really get to this community. Number one, it wasn't very well articulated who was eligible. So you had a lot of big companies that went out and applied for stimulus, and you've seen the reports about many of them giving the money back. It was done through the banking apparatus, and oddly enough, a lot of minority businesses don't have high-level banking relationships. You guys would be probably surprised to hear that a company as large as Urban One, which does about $500 million of revenue, we're a public company, we actually don't have a traditional banking relationship with Bank of America or Wells Fargo that lends us money. We actually end up borrowing money in the public term loan market. So Citigroup and Bank of America, those guys don't lend money to companies like ours. So if we were to apply for PPP, we don't actually have a banking relationship to get us to the front of the queue. And if that's the case for us, just imagine the smaller African American business, of which probably 90+% of Black-owned businesses are either sole proprietorship conservatorships and professionals, or they have, a number of they have small numbers of employees, 2 employees, 3 employees. And PPP was originally supposed to be to keep employees employed, and you would get that money forgiven if you did that. Well, that's kind of hard to get if you're an accountant or a consultant or run your own business, or you're a plumber. So very difficult and very challenged. And so we've spent a lot of time trying to talk to legislators about the importance of making that access more available to businesses in the African American community. And in the second round, you did see money start to go into community-based lending organizations, et cetera. And so a number of Black banks are starting to actually be active in allocating that. But I can't stress enough that an organization like the Joint Center, and Hill staffers need to call out and be specific about the help that the African American community needs, because this is not going to be a V-shaped recovery. This is going to be an elongated recession through which the African American community is going to actually get drugged along the bottom. Will not have access to most of the stimulus that is being provided, and we'll have an even harder time climbing back from when they're already operating at a deficit. So you're just going to continue to see a widening of the wealth gap in the U.S. We stand ready to have conversations or meet with any staff members, any think tank organizations that would like a better perspective on what's going on, because that barbershop, that restaurant, that accountant, lawyers are Black business owners. Those are our advertisers. We also work with our local community, organization and governmental organizations to help get the word out. So we just got a request from Prince George's County just yesterday. They're having a problem with people not wanting to go to the hospital when they're sick, because they feel like they're going to get COVID. And so they need the ability to get that message out to let people know what the safety precautions are that the hospitals are instituting to make sure people are safe if they come to get regular treatment. Well, every county, every state in America now has a budget deficit that is a mile wide, and they don't have money for advertising. They're about to lay people off. So, we have to step into that breach. That's the role that we play. Why I feel that we're important. I hope that I've been able to articulate, some of the pain that we see that's going on from our customers and in our community. And just to give you one last example, and then I'm going to turn it back over to the other speakers. Our radio revenues alone in the month of April were off 60+%. That's the top line. That's how far down our business went. And I feel grateful because at least there's another 40% that is running through the pipeline. If you are a barbershop or a restaurant, you have zero revenue. And that's the kind of devastation we're dealing with. So I'd like to thank the Joint Center, Spencer, thank you. Jessica, thank you. I appreciate the commemoration of my family in art, from Artist Lane, and please help, as I know you guys can, and that's why you're convening this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alfred, for kind of setting the stage for us and giving some context to why Black businesses are so important. I know we really value the work that you're doing, and we are also grateful that you still have the 40%, right? We still need you to survive through this. And so we're just really grateful that you're being here and being an advocate.
Thank you.
So as Spencer mentioned, my name is Jessica Fulton, and I am the Vice President at the Joint Center for Political and Economic Studies. And this session is part of a series that we're doing on COVID-19 policy in Black communities. As Spencer mentioned, you can find all of our previous videos on our website at jointcenter.org. Just a couple housekeeping notes as we continue the conversation. Please keep your microphone on mute. If you're on the phone, you can mute by pressing *6. We'll have some time for questions and comments towards the end. But if you have something that you really want to ask or share, go ahead and type it in the chat box and hit send, and our panelists will be able to take a look as we move through the conversation. So as Mr. Liggins discussed, we're very aware of the critical role Black businesses play in our communities, and we know that many businesses are struggling due to the current crisis. So we've seen some efforts from Congress, the Federal Reserve, and the Treasury to try to mitigate some negative impacts in Black communities, but we know that these things have had varying levels of effectiveness. And so we really wanted to convene this conversation to get some accurate information out on what Black businesses need in this moment. We are going to start the conversation with remarks from Ron Busby. Ron is the president and CEO of the U.S. Black Chambers. He's a former business owner and an advocate for Black-owned business. Ron, can you talk a little bit about how your members are experiencing the current crisis? What is going on with them? Let's see if we got Ron. Ron, we can't hear you.
All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Uh-oh. Can you see me though?
Yes.
All right, perfect. I appreciate Spencer having us back on. This is our second time having the opportunity to speak to your audience. Both times it's been about this pandemic, the COVID-19. Appreciate Alfred and what he's doing. The U.S. Black Chamber has created a partnership with NABOP, which represents all of the Black radio and TV across the country, and I'm excited to have TV One, Radio One as part of that partnership. And we look forward to continuing the great dialogue. I think part of what happened in this first 2 rounds of funding is really good communication. And without having great partners like Radio and TV One, it's even that much more difficult for our communities as well as our business owners to take advantage of some of the new proposals that are out on the street. To talk in reference to what is happening to Black businesses as it relates to the PPP, if you just look at the title PPP, it's already an indicator that it was not set up for Black business owners. If you look at the 2.6 million Black businesses that we own and operate around the country, 2.5 million of them don't have employees. And so when the program was set up to deal with payroll protection, it automatically did not include the voice of Black businesses. When they then took out the 1099 piece of it, where most Black businesses may not have full-time employees or even part-time employees, but have subcontractors 1099, because the majority of small businesses, that's how they started off. They have partners, they do joint ventures, they even do mergers, so that they don't have to take on the full responsibility of overhead, payroll taxes, insurance. And it gives that small business owner the flexibility of being able to have multiple clients and multiple customers. And so that excluded many of the Black businesses that were also able to participate. We know about the first funding of the $349 billion that was spent out in the first round. And we know that 50 firms took advantage and took up $250 billion. We understood that because they had large payrolls. But yesterday we found out some disturbing information, and that was, for those firms, many of them have been returning the dollars. But if you got more or less than $2 million, there's really no accountability that you have to return those dollars, and there's no penalty. We feel like that is a major concern and something that needs to be addressed. We were asking for those dollars for those firms that took advantage of it, that weren't supposed to take advantage of it, that when they return those dollars, that they return those dollars to CDFIs that were proposed to make sure that those dollars got into minority communities. That has not happened. The second phase of funding that came out just recently, we know that there was another $310 billion of that was set aside. A lot of that went towards smaller Black-owned communities and Black-owned businesses through the CDFI. $60 billion of that was set aside. $30 billion went to minority CDFIs that were small. But we also know that it was very difficult for Black businesses to even participate there. As Alfred stated earlier, the second piece of that legislation that made major concerns to us was you had to have a banking relationship. And we know that the majority of Black businesses, the top 3 concerns that we have is access to credit. And so for many of us, we did not have a banking relationship. We might have known our teller, we might have had a banking account, a checking account even, but not necessarily a loan officer. So we didn't have anyone to really help us through the process. Now this next funding is coming out. We heard a lot from Speaker Nancy Pelosi as well as Chuck Schumer. We had a conversation with him yesterday, and there are some things that are involved in this new proposed legislation that we're fighting, and we wanted to make sure that is there. First off, the PPP said you did not have to have any type of credit to participate. This was not based on your credit score. But many of the fintech companies that are now participating are holding people's payroll protection funding back based on their credit score. We feel like that's illegal, and we're going to continue to fight to make sure that that's not happening. We want our businesses to establish good banking relationships. So we're not interested in a quick fix of let's just go down and get a quick check. We want you to actually go in, establish a banking account, establish a credit account, so that the next time we face something like this, we will have had the opportunity to really get the credit that we need. We're more interested in long-term sustainability than a quick fix to get us out of this. We also want to understand that there are going to be opportunities to come through this. We know that 35 to 40% of all Black-owned businesses are going to go out of business. That's primarily because we were in the 4 industries that were hit the hardest. That's leisure, that's things like beauty salons, barbershops, hair salons. That's hospitality, that's transportation, and retail. 40% of all Black revenue comes from those 4 industries, and they are being hit the hardest. But that also means that on the upside of that there's going to be opportunities for mergers as well as acquisition. We're telling our businesses the reason why we want you to establish credit is because there are going to be opportunities for us to pick off. Those businesses that are going out of business still have customers, they still have clients, they still have employees, and they have product and or services that they have delivered. We want to make sure that our businesses are in front of those conversations so that when those businesses do fail, we have other Black businesses to be able to participate so that we have size and scale to be able to go after some of the larger opportunities that we see are coming down in the future.
Mm-hmm.
We understand that a lot of our businesses are on small margins, so we got to think about when we come out of this, what are we going to look like in the future? You'll see that the U.S. Black Chamber has education series every week talking about the future of our industries, from restaurants to salons and beauty parlors. What is the future of these businesses going to be, and how do we take advantage of it today to prepare ourselves for the future? And so if you go to usblackchambers.org, we're there to talk about the legislation as it sits today, as well as what it's going to look like and the issues that we think are important to Black businesses. And we'll be on to answer questions later on. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ron. We really appreciate you kind of setting the context about what we need to do moving forward. We're going to move to Connie Evans. Connie is the president and CEO of the Association for Enterprise Opportunity. Connie, can you talk a little bit more about the experience of small businesses?
Sure, and good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you, Spencer and Jessica, for inviting me to join this discussion. You know, I think it's important to step back, similar to some of the comments that previous speakers have made, Ron in particular, but really think about why Black-owned businesses were so challenged in getting access to the benefits, if you will, of the stimulus package. That package, the CARES Act, overall, I think presented problems for Blacks, whether we're talking about business owners or not, to be able to access it. But when you start looking very particularly at the payroll protection program, I think there are three big overarching issues that really stand out. And Spencer, in his opening comments, actually mentioned our report, the Tapestry of Black-owned business, the Tapestry of Black business ownership in America. And in that report, we identified three primary barriers: the wealth gap, the starting wealth gap, where African Americans actually do start when they're in business and life period and trying to actively be part of the economy and this marketplace. There is the wealth gap, and then they meet up against that credit gap. And then the third barrier that report actually identifies is the trust gap. Those inequities that are driven as part of each of those barriers were exacerbated in this post-COVID-19 stimulus package. I think we saw, number one, that as that package relied on having a relationship with banks, and that the program actually went through major banks to be implemented, that was just a clear design problem with the organization, when you think that people have to have credit to be in a situation where you have a bank relationship. And so again, our statistics show that that lack of wealth doesn't allow you to actually build the credit. One of the other things we saw that business owners need and were challenged by is understanding the rules of the game. I think about understanding the rules that put you up front were unclear, and in some cases really inaccessible. It's, again, I think goes back historically on the banking side, the lack of the predominance of the historical roots of being unbanked in this country. Now, if you just add the two that I've already said, you add that you don't have the major banks, you don't have the wealth. That wealth has kept you from being able to gain the credit with major banking institutions. One of the other things we saw that business owners need at this time is being able to have a digital presence. The entire marketplace has moved and has been moving for some time to a digital marketplace, and Black businesses kind of in general have not kept up with those skills. And if you go back to looking at why, in some cases, is that Blacks do not have the same certifications and educations because they were not accessible because, again, the lack of starting wealth or the inavailability of credit. So you add those two things with a third challenge that I, again, mentioned in our report, but saw play out in the stimulus package. And that is the issue of trust. We found that the trust barrier on its own is a huge challenge. And we're talking here about institutional trust, that thinking about the lack of understanding. Part of that lack of understanding also led into a lack of outreach. The system of the programs that were part of the stimulus package did not have information freely flowing. It didn't use our community leaders as well as they could have to getting clarity and helping people develop an understanding of what it would take to get in that line, but to get first in line and how to achieve success once they were in that line. I think we really must recognize the challenge of trust, because those relationships that were not established with bank institutions, our communities really missed out. They missed out because their churches weren't informed and used as a vehicle for delivering information and outreach. Even though there were limitations on congregational gatherings, people still were gathered in congregation in many different ways. and we're still receiving or looking to the church for information. I don't think they found it there. Our first guest talked about how the radio was used, but also probably not to its fullest. We know that institutions like restaurants, for example, in Black communities, serve as a role of social capital in communities and are entrusted. And they were not open to utilize. They were not seen as an opportunity to meet the challenge of the lack of understanding and information that business owners could have been receiving had they were able to have connections to some of the community institutions that they rely on. Simply put, I think the chosen mechanism for the largest method of assistance, the PPP, really was based off the program that has the least success with Black businesses through that entity, through the SBA, through Treasury. It was based on a program that already before COVID-19 pandemic wasn't reaching Black-owned businesses in any significant or sufficient way. They left out looking at the people who actually have those relationships. AEO members include organizations and community mission-based lenders, including community development financial institutions, but other mission-led lenders who are in the community who were trying to get access to build on the relationships they already have in those communities. We didn't use them. It was a major mistake in the first round. And in the second round of the PPP, even though CDFIs were allowed in slowly, we know they even met with misinformation and a lot of challenges. And so I think when you look back, and hopefully we will get a chance to look back at actually the details and the numbers of who used the PPP program, we will be able to see that in any kind of package that is designed to reach Black small business owners or Black business owners, period, that you do have to match the characteristics of those businesses. Again, 96% who are sole proprietors, over 40% meeting operating in the hardest hit sectors. Business owners that, again, really are, when they employ, are so important to Black employment because we know before COVID, they were responsible for about 1/5 of all Black employment. As the marketplace eventually returns to whatever this new normal will be, there will still be significant unemployment, and it will be crucial for Black-owned businesses to be able to access resources. We need to make sure, as we're planning and advocating for new policy, that we recognize that when these three barriers, the trust gap, the wealth gap, and the credit gap combine and collide, they act like kryptonite in keeping Black-owned businesses from reaching their potential. We have to change policy. We have to have an inequality fight that we take all the way to the mat so that we can get the kind of relief and the kind of stimulus. Relief and stimulus are different. So we need to make sure we design both programs to really meet the needs of the sector. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Connie. We're going to shift a little bit to the perspective of policymakers. So we're going to hear from Marie Johns. She is a former Deputy Administrator of the Small Business Administration. Marie, can you speak from your perspective about challenges of the current stimulus and what we need to do to move forward?
Thank you, Jessica. Thank you, Spencer. And it's quite an honor to be on a part of this august panel. What I will not do, even out of respect for your assignment for me, Jessica, I will not be an apologist for the SBA. They screwed up. I think in terms of the volume of the program, PPP, the number of loans that flowed through the agency, I believe the statistic was a factor of 10 in a month and a half 10 times what the agency generally handles in a year. So it just was an overwhelming process. The program came to the agency with lack of clear guidance, with no standard operating procedures, et cetera. And so the first round was really quite disastrous. And we're seeing the results as we see who got the money. As Ron said, the very nature of the program, talking about payroll protection, left us out from the very beginning. So the program design was not thoughtful in terms of how it would relate to particularly Black-owned businesses. And then the third issue that I had with the program is I thought the application process was incredibly onerous, particularly for business owners who were dealing in very stressful circumstances and trying to get a rapid response. So just was not a well crafted program. And as Connie mentioned, I mean, the SBA as an agency has not had a robust history of supporting Black-owned businesses. And one of the things that I tried desperately to do at every turn was to make sure I was partnering with the U.S. Black Chambers, AEO, OFN, all of the organizations that I knew had a window into our business communities around the country. And the problem is that is not necessarily institutionalized at the agency, and more work needs to be done in that regard. What I wanted to turn to with the bit of a remaining time that I have is to talk a little bit about an intense work effort that I have been involved with locally as part of the Mayor Bowser Reopen DC task force. And that has been very informative and also cause for great concern about where we're headed in the days following day one, whenever the city does reopen. It will not be business as usual. I know that we all know that. We're going to have, particularly our small neighborhood corridor businesses are going to need more funds in order to restaff, to restock their stores, in order to ensure that they have the items in place to meet the significant regulatory and compliance measures that are going to be imposed. PPE is not going away. We will still be living with masks and other requirements for major sanitizing efforts. That will continue, and there are costs associated with all of that. For example, I talked with a young woman who lives in Northeast DC. She had established a nail salon business, and her sanitation costs are going to probably quadruple for her business. And on the margins that she has, it's very difficult and a cause for concern to see if she's even going to be able to stay in business. I think about my own hair care location. Vera Winfield has been in business at 8th and Kennedy Streets Northwest for over 20 years. She will be required under the regulations to remove at least one of her chairs from her salon. That chair is probably paying a utility bill, probably paying part of her taxes, and probably contributing to margin. So when you're talking about a small business like a hair salon, moving a chair in order to be in compliance with physical distancing requirements, you're not talking about just moving a chair, you're talking about a real hit to the bottom line. And that's what our businesses are facing. So in sum, what I think are the areas where we have to focus, and I'm so glad that Lisa is going to be the wrap up batter on this panel, but we have got to ensure that we have the financial institutions that understand mission. It is critically important to have those institutions play a major role in addressing the needs of companies in the this new, very radically changed economy. For example, I'm very closely involved with one of Lisa's members, a local CDFI bank. And interestingly enough, I got calls from several folks who knew I was associated with the bank they had banking relationships with a Wells Fargo or a Bank of America, and yet they still were not able to apply for the PPP. So there were some cases when our businesses were discriminated against to that degree that they had the banking relationship, they still could not apply for the PPP, but they were able to be served by the CDFI banks that, or this particular one in Washington. So diverse set of financial institutions critical. Advocacy and education, picking up on your theme, Connie, we've got to have a stronger mechanism for getting information to people so that they know what to expect, how to respond, where to get what they need, et cetera. The whole issue of equity as it relates to businesses reopening is going to be huge. Businesses who are part of chains or who have deep resources, they'll be able to provide the PPE, they'll be able to do whatever kind of physical restructuring of their business that's going to be required. Many of our businesses won't have access to that information, that technical assistance, those resources, and we've got to make sure that the advocacy and information education channels are robust. And then the last point I'll make is there's no peanut butter approach for this. We've got to have targeted responses to the need for financial resources for our businesses. We know that the fact that we were excluded from the PPP assistance by and large, that in the future rounds of assistance, it's got to be targeted. For example, and not to run the risk of overgeneralizing, but one of the recommendations that I have been advocating is that we know in Washington where most of the challenges are. They're on the east end of the city. And so we need to have resources targeted, geographically targeted to those businesses where it's desperately needed, as opposed to having some broad brush generalized program. So financial institutions and their involvement, particularly the mission lenders, a strong, robust advocacy, education, information program through the U.S. Black Chamber and other organizations, and then financial assistance that's targeted. I think all those three elements are going to be absolutely critical for us to have some hope of a salvaged Black business community, particularly in Washington, and I would dare say in other parts of the country as well. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Marie. I think you gave us a lot to think about moving forward. And I think you are clearly thinking beyond where Congress is right now. So we just appreciate you for naming some things that I think we really need to be thinking about. Next, we're going to move to Lisa Mensah. Lisa is the president and CEO of the Opportunity Finance Network. Can you discuss the role of CDFIs right now?
I can, Jessica. Thank you so much for inviting me. Thank you, Spencer. It's an amazing panel. And if you've made it all the way to this, I don't want to waste a second of this time. Thank you, Al, and thank you, Ron, my dear friend Connie and Marie. This has really, I think, been one of the best discussions I've heard on what is needed in the Black business community and this marriage of access to capital. So I want to thank you, Jessica, for teeing it up so clearly. The one good thing out of this hideous crisis is that it's revealed what really drives this economy. And if you were confused before, you're not anymore. We need Marie's beauty salon. We need the janitors' businesses. We need the truckers. We need all of those people. And I think Ron's data, 2.5 million Black businesses, 2.6 Black businesses, many of them with 1099. That's what we need to run America. And it's no longer unclear to us. So what it's also revealed is that we need the kind of lenders who are on your side. And that's why I'm so proud to represent a large network of community development financial institutions. And I serve along with Connie, many of the nation's CDFIs. And I'm thankful that more people than ever have finally heard of that acronym. It doesn't exactly roll off the tongue, but it is the Community Development Financial Institutions. And this is what we were missed, but it's allowed us to really prove why we are essential to not only this moment of crisis, but also to the moment of recovery and rebuilding and repurposing that it's going to take in this economy. So just let me say a little bit. If you have never heard of a CDFI and These are the lenders who have been over 30 years in communities. We serve, many of us are minority depository institutions, but CDFIs are certified by the Treasury. Our network has just about 300 members. And as in prior crises, we're the first responders in a financial crisis. We leaned in and did things that were outsized for our small hands. There's about $185 billion of assets in the industry as a whole. In the small business arena, at last count, there was about 19 billion of small business loans already in portfolio. Mostly we were under the radar, not anymore, because what it revealed, what this moment of crisis revealed, is that it matters who your lender is. And that's what Connie has said, that's what Marie has said. And so we're very proud. Lenders like our member, the Black Business Investment Fund in Florida, who immediately, before there was a congressional response, they called their portfolio, they reached out to everyone. They started offering, what can we do to change terms? They created a relief fund, and they put right on their website, even when they weren't on site, what could be done. This is the kind of action you get from our CDFIs and our mission lenders. And even with one hand and sometimes two hands tied behind our back, CDFIs and other mission lenders were able to get out loans during this PPP period. The numbers finally have been shared by the SBA, and it shows that CDFIs made impacts. 300 CDFIs made more than 50,000 loans, totaling $2.8 billion. And for the minority depository institutions, only 122 of them, they made more than over 59,000 loans, totaling $4 billion. So even amidst the mess, we were able to perform, get something out, and we're still going. So if you're listening now and you know businesses that are still interested in the Paycheck Protection Program, there's still funds, thank goodness, either from those who have had to return them or the way the program has slowed a little and the set-asides that happened, there are still funds. So if you don't know your CDFI, I encourage you to go to our website, ofn.org. There's a locator. We try to explain on that locator who's doing PPP loans. And there are CDFIs who've stepped in and have tried to help. I think one of the reasons, though, Jessica, that you wanted to have this call now was to talk about as we move beyond the emergency dollars of the PPP. And many of us have been speaking about what it's going to take to move forward. And I thought Al was really brutally honest with us. If a successful communications firm already lost 60% of revenues and some lost 100% of revenues, what does the build back look like? And this is where I want to speak to where I think the CDFI partnership matters. And I think this is where the policy work remains. I believe that CDFI will be the kind of partners, sorry, dog. I believe that CDFIs will be the kind of partners that businesses need to move forward out of this recession. They'll be the ones who will work with you as you repurpose. When you've had to tape up that chair that Marie mentioned, you're going to want a CDFI who will understand what's changed in your revenue picture, in your P&L, and understand and work with you so that we can move forward in this moment. In order to do this, our top recommendation is that policymakers in this next iteration move to do an emergency appropriation for CDFIs of $1 billion. And we were so pleased to see under the House leadership yesterday in the HEROES Act that $1 billion appropriation, our primary recommendation, has been adopted. And we're urging that to go as an emergency set of resources through the CDFI fund. When those dollars hit the books of CDFIs, our performance in the past has been that we leverage those dollars 12 to 1. So it's not just a $1 billion appropriation that's going to be immediately gone. It'll be leveraged. We will use that to make more loans. And I think this is a critical movement of how we go forward in this crisis. I think so many folks are ready to throw in the towel and just say, small businesses will be forever changed. I think our job as community leaders is to say, of course there will be changes, but we're going to be here for the people who will rebuild and who will bring our economy back. This economy wasn't built with just a few big businesses. It had small businesses, and particularly in our Black communities. Small businesses were essential, and they will continue to be. And I love the point that they are going to have to be more digitally savvy, that Connie mentioned. But I think what we know now is that it's going to take capital aligned with those businesses. And that is the particular place where our CDFIs, our minority depository institutions, are in business to be that kind of matched capital. So if there's any silver lining out of this, it's that our champions, our allies, have been revealed, and they're in Congress right now, some on both sides of the aisles, that we are beginning to be able to say there is a way forward out of this crisis, but it's going to take investing in the kind of lenders that are required to get us out of this crisis. And I sure hope this is a long fight ahead. So all of the folks that are listening on this, this is part of our fight. I want to end by just saying one thing. It's not just the government players that have been active, it's also the private players. You know, for the first time ever, my phone was buzzing when CEOs of major financial institutions stood up and said, we need CDFIs. We don't have these clients. That was true for Goldman Sachs and Bank of America. They stood up and said, we're incomplete without CDFIs. Major corporations, Google, went at record speed and advanced a partnership with us to reach more CDFIs, to get resources to small businesses, acknowledging that the rebuild out of this. And they came with resources that weren't just COVID, not just for a few months, but in the Google case, 5 and 10-year money to really build. So I think the private sector will react and will respond and will partner, but it takes the leadership of the public sector. Those are the enduring big dollars, and those are our dollars as citizens that really need to join this fight. So I'm so pleased, Spencer, you've taken on, we're usually not the popular topic, CDFIs and business development. You've got so many other hot topics at the Joint Center, but I'm very thankful that you made some time today to really look at a pillar of our economy and as our future as a country. So thanks.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you to all of our panelists who've spoken so far. We have 3 quick questions, and then we're going to give our panelists a chance to to respond and give their remarks. We have very few minutes left, so we're going to move pretty quickly. Our first question is from David Clooney of the Black Economic Alliance.
Thanks for turning to me, and I'll try to be brief. So good to see many of you that I know on this call. And by way of background, for those I don't know, I just joined the Black Economic Alliance about 2 months ago as executive director, and relevant to this conversation, spent a few years at JP Morgan Chase in corporate responsibility, where I got to work with Connie Evans and some other folks, and have been in the Obama Treasury Department in the front office before that. So with that backdrop, we have been very focused at BEA on long-term sustainability of Black businesses, very much about the long-term access to capital solutions we can be talking about, especially as we have spent over $3 trillion. We're looking at another, either in this bill or in the aggregate, $3 trillion or more. And I think we can be honest politically that we're spending this money now. Who knows when we'll have the opportunity to make this kind of big shift and adjustment to our economy again. So we're very focused, of course we need to be focused on relief, but we're much more focused on recovery and where we end up after this rebalancing of the economy. So I'm interested in, one, kudos to the folks, everybody on this line who have been great advocates for CDFIs, MDIs, and the other institutions that are actually doing business with and getting the capital and even technical assistance and support needed to our businesses. I think the chorus of voices around this has been very effective, and I'm interested to hear how you all are thinking about advocating for more longer term recovery. Not only, I agree with you, Lisa, I think the $1 billion that is in the House proposal for CDFI funding via the CDFI fund is a great start. There's a lot more we can do on long-term CDFI funding that is not just PPP and relief related, but also other things like creating increased liquidity and working with the private sector about things they can do, like buying bundles of loans to create more space on the balance sheets of CDFIs and MDIs to lend, and helping them get more tier 1 capital. A number of different levers we have to pull. So one, I'm inviting myself to help amplify the things that you all are talking about, because I think the chorus is important. But two, interested to hear very quickly about how you're thinking about focusing on the longer term when so many legislators have been so focused on PPP and immediate relief.
Thank you so much, David. And we also have a question from Elisa Richardson. Elisa is the Deputy Chief of Staff for Senator Tim Scott, and she would like to understand more about how they can continue to amplify these messages in Black communities. She says that the senator was actively engaged with pastors and community leaders before and during the PPP rollout, but that we clearly need to do more, and she wants to understand what perspectives are on this call about getting the word out. And we have one more question around how we might make some shifts in the role that major financial institutions play and how they may solve the problems that we raise. Like, what would that look like? What would they need to do differently to be more effective? So I will open that up to our panelists. And once you all have answered, we'll go ahead and close it out. So thank you.
So if I could just make a quick comment, and then I'm sure Ron will have something to say as well. And this is in response to David's issue about going forward. I think that Ron's point about us really focusing on the structure of Black businesses with it and the importance of mergers down the road. We have got to really talk honestly and very seriously about how do we diversify the playing field for Black businesses in the United States and from a global perspective as well, for that matter, and how we instill in our entrepreneurial community the more level of comfort with mergers, the importance of scale, and really moving that conversation forward, because I think it's been said a number of times. The other thing that this pandemic has shown is that capacity matters, and we've got to spend time and energy on getting our business sector more diverse and build greater capacity. I think that's absolutely crucial.
If I could, I also would like to just speak to David's comment and question about how do we keep this engaged. AEO, along with Ron and some others, have established a coalition called Page 30 Coalition. It literally takes its name from page 30 of the CARES Act, and it's meant to be a sustainable effort to address ongoing solutions through Congress, and not just the PPP current program, but being able to really bring a broad sector of the marketplace together to advocate, to continue to advocate for the equity in policy making that we need to go forward to help support Black-owned business. So I invite you all to Page 30 Coalition, Page 30 coalition.org to learn more and to join us.
Jessica, I'd love to thank everyone for those great questions. David, for insisting on the long term, and Senator Scott's office for asking how we amplify messages, and then the final question about financial institutions. I will, of no surprise, see a linkage between all three of those things. To me, both to get a long-term recovery and to get deeper roots in the communities, we're going to need a strengthened CDFI sector. And, Senator Scott's office was a leader in producing a big piece of legislation in opportunity zones on the tax side, and led with, I know, Senator Booker in trying to see more investment flow to disinvested communities. What we now know is that it's not enough to do it just on tax side without an intentionality to target, to get to the people who know their communities. And I hope that we'll be building on this kind of legislation in the future with a real target. I like Marie's point. It can't just be peanut butter that we spread it all around. We've got to target to the institutions who know and have a mission driven to serve the institutions who are in our minority communities. And for me, the financial community, which has through years, through CRA, taken a few bold steps, it's going to need to go deeper. And I hope they take this, many have stepped up in this moment, but this is a moment to go deeper, deeper than zip codes, deeper than the CRA commitments of the past, and to stand with the fighters in their communities, which they can't reach by themselves. So that's how I would respond.
Good afternoon. This is Ron Busby. Great questions, great panel, great panelists. I want to say a couple of things. First, in this legislation, 700 plus pages, you will not see the words Black or African American. Nowhere listed was our community's concerns earmarked to be able to change the conditions of our communities. What you did see is small businesses, and Marie can tell you that that's anywhere from a 500 employee firm down to what we say are mom and or pops, not mom and pops. So the first thing I think that needs to be addressed is accountability. There's absolutely no accountability in this legislation. Who got the funding? What did they do with the funding? Did they need the funding? Is this an ongoing business? And how can we track that data? We have no data currently to be able to really discuss what's happening in our communities and where those dollars are going. So the first thing I would say, and I know that I have people on here that are from Treasury and from SBA, but I think we need to be able to tinker a little bit with some of the obligation for banks to be able to display and to be able to share with the taxpayers, because this is our money, where those dollars are going. I think that's extremely important. The second thing is, for those folks that got the money during the first round, there's no liability on their end to turn those dollars back in. What we were saying on our part early on was, if you got the money, we know that 50 firms got that first $250 billion, and many of them were ineligible to take advantage of those dollars. As they are now returning those dollars, we want to earmark those dollars to go to the friendly CDFIs in our community to make sure that now the businesses that need the money can take advantage of it. Third, and I'm hearing all the time that many small businesses are now being faced with having to meet a lot of different criteria of how they're going to spend these PPP and idle dollars. Those weren't the same stipulations given to the larger firms when they got the dollars. I don't want to see any new rules placed upon the people that are applying for the dollars today versus those that got the dollars during the first round. If it was good enough for the large firms, then it's good enough for the Black firms around this country. There needs to be equity, but more importantly, there needs to be some transparency for those companies that got those dollars and now are saying, if it's below $2 million, you don't have to repay it. But if I'm a small business owner and I got $50,000, and now you're telling me that I got to jump through hoops to make sure that those dollars go in the right places, but you're not asking my large competitors to do the same thing. I think that is something that we can do as community and business leaders, as well as advocates around the country, to make sure that when this next round of funding comes out, that we know who's getting those dollars and that we have some accountability and some transparencies so that we don't face these continuing conversations about why are Black businesses being left out, when in fact of the matter, we can't really tell you how much money Black businesses got or didn't get, because the SBA, as well as our banking partners, will refuse to share that information because of what they feel like is a discrepancy in reference to discrimination. I'm saying it's a discrimination for me not to be able to know where those dollars went. And now we are all here talking about how do we how do we partner in the future? We don't know where the money went in the past. I think there's got to be some transparency, and collective, we've got to make sure that we mandate to our leaders from both Congress and the House that there's some transparency going forward.
Well, thank you everyone for attending, for joining us today. Thank you to our fantastic panelists. I learned a lot. And I really appreciate you spending the time to talk to us and to help us understand more about what is going on with Black businesses.